Welcome to Lady Killers with me, Lucy Worsley from BBC Radio 4. In this episode, we're investigating a case that became known as the Bermondsey Horror. It's a story just bursting with Victorian melodrama. We've got terrible confessions.
We beat him dreadfully upon the floor. We washed our hands in his crimson gore.
Courtroom theatrics.
History teaches us that the female is capable of reaching higher in point of virtue than the male, but that once she gives way to vice, she sinks far lower than our sex.
And desperate declarations.
I have not been treated like a Christian, but like a wild beast of the forest. Base, shameful England.
So, loosen your stays. We are in for a thrilling ride. I'm Lucy Worsley, and I'm back with a new series of Lady Killers, where true crime meets history with a twist. We are re-examining the wild and unthinkable crimes of women from more than 100 years ago. These are often quite ordinary women who committed extraordinary acts. We hear their voices, their words, and we ask, is life so very different for women today? This time, we've a truly sensational story to tell. I'm so pleased to be joined by someone who knows everything there is to know about intrigue and suspense. She is a #1 best-selling novelist and the founder-director of the Women's Prize for Fiction. Most recently, she's brought us The Ghost Ship, the latest novel in her celebrated Joubert family chronicles, and the non-fiction book Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries, How Women Also Built the World. It's Kate Mosse.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Welcome, Kate. I'm so glad that you are our guest detective today because things are going to get very dark very quickly.
Right up my street.
The year is 1849. We're in Bermondsey, just south of the Thames in London, where two policemen are searching for a man named Patrick O'Connor. He's a customs officer who's gone missing. He was last seen walking towards number 3 Miniver Place. The police have searched the house. They've even dug up the garden. They're just about to give up when one officer notices something a bit funny about 2 of the flagstones in the kitchen floor.
The 2 stones appeared to have been recently removed. I proceeded to remove a portion of the earth. When I got down about a foot, I discovered the toe of a man. And when I got about 18 inches down, I discovered the loins of a man and the back of a man. It was lying on the belly, and the legs were brought back and tied up round the haunches with a strong cord. It was quite naked.
Gruesome. What on earth is going on here? I went to London with our in-house historian, Professor Rosalind Crone from the Open University, to find out more. Ros, this is a highly desirable neighbourhood now. It wasn't quite so highly desirable in 1849, was it?
Rather less desirable, I would say. Bermondsey then is the centre of the leather trade, and if you can imagine, Lucy, there are tanneries all around us, pumping their noxious waste into the open sewers, and all of that is flowing into a very polluted Thames. Imagine the stench. And it was that also made people here quite vulnerable to disease. At this time, in the summer of 1849, there is a cholera epidemic in London, raging, reaching a peak. By the end of summer, 10,000 Londoners had died.
We're here because you think that the house where the body was found stood just the other side of this wall.
Yes, 3 Miniver Place. And I've brought you a picture of it, Lucy, an artistic representation. You see the policemen here, and they're finding...
Are those the little toes?
They're the little toes sticking out of the lime. Now, this was a body that was buried just 12 inches below the kitchen floor.
Yes.
It was buried in quicklime, so they obviously wanted it to decompose quite quickly. This is no ordinary murder scene. This is more like a kind of gangland killing.
Gosh. And who had been living in 3 Miniver Place at the time?
The occupants of the house were a couple called Maria and Frederick Manning, a young couple in their late 20s, no children, and they had recently taken lodgings here. Maria was quite interesting. She had come over to England and worked as a lady's maid for a while, most recently for the daughter of the Duchess of Sutherland.
This is very Downton Abbey. I like this.
Yeah, it sounds it, doesn't it? Now, when she was working as a lady's maid, she met this man called Frederick Manning, and he was a guard working on the Great Western Railway. They had a relationship and they decided to get married in 1847, and then he lost his job, potentially because he had been mixed up in railway robberies.
And what was unusual about their domestic setup?
Well, they had this friend, a man called Patrick O'Connor. Now, when she was a lady's maid, Maria had also met this man. That relationship continued after her marriage to Frederick. And this Patrick was a constant visitor to the house. She goes to his lodgings and he comes here almost on a daily basis.
This is quite unlike our idea of Victorian life. You've got a married couple and a third party, and they're in a sort of open threesome together.
Yeah, it's a menage a trois.
Gosh.
Gosh, indeed. Blimey.
A Victorian menage a trois. Now, Kate, I think this has the makings of a great thriller. What do you think?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, firstly, the title, Bermondsey Horror, but also the idea that it was kind of hidden in plain sight that there was this three-way relationship going on, that everybody was a little bit dodgy. And they're in that part of London, which, of course, as you say, has become terribly shishi now. But it was, a nest of vipers. Gothic fiction has a very particular form. And if you like, it is the sense of there will always be an innocent, although O'Connor is hardly innocent in this case. But the key thing about Gothic is this. It's the balance between light and dark, between moral and immoral people. The idea that beneath the surface, everything is somehow putrefying and falling to pieces. You always have darkness, you always have mysterious streets, you always have dirt and grime. And the resolution will be about essentially the light being shone in. And so everything about this story, I mean, it's made for a Gothic thriller.
Fabulous. I'm also quite interested in this new 19th century phenomenon of enjoying true crime. There's a famous essay comes out in 1827 by Thomas de Quincey called On Murder as Considered as One of the Fine Arts. And it's kind of a founding manifesto for true crime podcast makers, because it talks about the British as a nation of murder fanciers, connoisseurs in murder. How does that make us feel? What do we really think about this phenomenon, enjoying other people's misfortune?
Well, it's never gone away. I think it's because there is resolution in crime. The real world is messy and complicated, and we're not necessarily in charge of what happens to us. When you read a crime story, even if it's a true crime story, it sounds like it's, if you like, almost pornographic and salacious to be revelling in others' misfortunes. But think of it this way. There's a problem, something happens, they're caught, there is resolution, that you can step away, you have power over that story, and it's your relationship with the story. You don't have to go any further than you want to. Also, I mean, it was the great Edith Wharton, the great American writer. She talked about the thrill of the shudder, and I think there is an element of truth in that, the thrill of the shudder.
And there's plenty to make us shudder back in Bermondsey in August 1849. The police have found this body, but how can they be sure it's Patrick O'Connor? Don't forget, the dead man is in a pretty poor state, except that is for the full set of dentures they find in his mouth.
I'm a dentist. I knew Patrick O'Connor, the deceased, as a patient. Well, I sold this set of false teeth to him.
Mr. Patrick O'Connor has been found. And there's more. Someone has also been to his lodgings and stolen a considerable amount of money and some valuable share certificates. An inquest finds that O'Connor was shot just above the right eye and finished off with multiple blows to the head with a heavy implement. But number 3, Minerva Place, the scene of the crime, is deserted. The residents, that's Patrick's lover Maria Manning and her husband Frederick, have scarpered. The Mannings quickly become the prime suspects. Evidence mounts against them. The police discover that in the weeks leading up to O'Connor's death, the couple have been on rather an incriminating shopping spree. They'd bought a crowbar, a heavy shovel, and a large amount of quicklime. They'd also been asking their lodger, a medical student, some highly suspicious questions.
He once asked me what part of the head was most vital or tender, where the brain was placed, whether I thought a murderer went to heaven.
Now, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out that this makes the Mannings look pretty guilty. These events would ultimately end up in a popular ballad.
We premeditated to take his life. To our home invited him one Thursday night. The murderous weapons we had prepared, and we trepanned him into a fatal snare.
The police are desperate to find Maria and Frederick. They distribute wanted posters to ports and railway stations across the country. These posters describe Maria as 30 years old, 5 feet 7 inches high, stout, a fresh complexion with long dark hair, good looking. The police receive numerous tip-offs. Nearly all of them are false leads. The police even stop a steamship en route to New York, only to find that it's got the wrong Mannings on board. It looks like Frederick and Maria might get away with murder. Until, that is, one Bobby on the beat strikes it lucky. Moz and I are back on the case.
There's good old-fashioned shoe leather policing going on, and one of the detectives, Sergeant Shaw, manages to track down a cab driver who said that he collected Maria Manning at 3 Miniver Place on the afternoon of the 13th of August. And she had with her 3 large boxes and a carpet bag.
And where did she go?
She asked the cabbie to take her to London Bridge Station.
Let's do the same thing.
Right, let's go.
If you've got any money, Ross, you might have to pay. Can we go to London Bridge Station, please? Maria is travelling by a horse-drawn hackney cab. She stops on the way to the station to buy some white cards. She's going to use them as luggage labels. She writes on them, Mrs. Smith, passenger to Paris, to be left until called for. Now, that's not the best false name in the world, is it? But there we go. She uses the cards to label 2 of her boxes, and she leaves them with the porter at London Bridge Station. Oh, hello. Can I leave this luggage with you?
Yes, no problem.
Great, thanks. So, what was in those boxes that Mrs. Smith checked into the left luggage then?
Yeah, that's a good question, Lucy. Well, the police, when they follow the evidence of the cab driver and come here, they open the boxes and they find out. And I have with me the itemised list that they created, so you can see...
Clues.
Yep, here they've got contents of the small box.
Yes.
And then over the page, the large box. So
a lot of stuff here.
huge amount of stuff. So we've got things like 11 petticoats.
Yes.
28 pairs of stockings.
This is all of her stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, but crucially as well, there is a dress and some other fabric which have blood stains.
Blood-stained clothing.
It looks to me like all the essentials you need to start a new life somewhere else, but also evidence, which I suspect she didn't want to leave just lying around.
Mm-hmm. So we know what's happened to the luggage. What has happened to Mrs. Maria Manning?
Well, Lucy, it's back to the cab and onwards to Euston Station.
Euston! We're off to Euston now.
Let's go.
Oh, my goodness. The chase continues. I'm really getting into this now. Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thanks. First class ticket to Edinburgh, please.
Would there be a single or return?
Oh, definitely a single. I'm not coming back. So, Maria has got her first class ticket to Edinburgh, it turns out. What's her plan?
Yeah, so here we are, Euston Station, first intercity railway station built in London. She's got a ticket to Edinburgh. She wants to get away from London, away from the scene of the crime, and away from her husband.
Is the plan going to work?
I don't know, Lucy. We'll have to wait and see.
It's a cliffhanger. Off she goes.
Oh.
There she is.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Good luck. Oh, didn't mean that. Off she goes to Scotland. So, Maria is off to Edinburgh. And what about Frederick? Well, he is shocked to realise that his wife has double-crossed him and run off. Also taking with her Patrick O'Connor's cash and share certificates. Now, Frederick just panics. He tries to buy himself a passage on a ship to Australia, but this is characteristically gormless of him. He doesn't have quite enough money, and he only gets as far as the Channel Islands. So on the one hand, Kate, we've got Maria, who's organised and active, and we've got Frederick, who's a bit useless. Maria isn't a martyr, is she? She's the heroine of her own story.
No, well, I wouldn't say heroine necessarily, but I would say she was the protagonist of her own story, absolutely.
This isn't really what we expect from a Victorian woman, is it? It's not respectable.
There certainly is this kind of myth in Victorian England. I blame Coventry Patmore for this. The angel in the house. The idea that women should be a certain sort of thing. They're quiet, they're ministering, they're silent, they're always very subject to their husband's views. They don't speak. You know, they're not the leader of the marriage. That's never been true, but that was the writing that started to come in the Victorian era. And of course, for most women, they didn't have any choice.
So the papers, Kate, are going to make a really big thing about Maria's appearance. She wears this trademark black satin dress.
I would say with Maria Manning, a lot of this is that people think she's above her station. That because she was a lady's maid, she's behaving like a lady. And that's the one thing that is unforgivable, particularly because she's not English.
I think she's wearing her mistress's clothes in a sort of really deep sense, isn't she?
In a deep sense, yes, absolutely. And so that's the other thing that's not feminine, that she's taking too much upon herself. She's removing herself from the place that she should be in society and acting in a very confident and visible way. And that's not seen as feminine.
The Mannings are by now notorious through the coverage of the Bermondsey horror, as the papers call it. And the papers call Maria, I really love this, the Lady Macbeth of Bermondsey. But she can't remain on the run forever. In Edinburgh, Maria is still posing as Mrs. Smith, but her cover gets blown when she goes into a stockbroker's with O'Connor's share certificates. This stockbroker has been alerted to the fact that these particular certificates have been stolen, and he reports Maria to the police. Useless Frederick is also arrested in Jersey, and both husband and wife are brought back to London to await trial.
Justice pursued me without delay, and I was taken upon that fatal day.
Their trial begins on the 26th of October 1849 at the Old Bailey. This is an unmissable event. Maria's barrister says that Frederick was the ringleader and indeed the killer, but Frederick's barrister tells rather a different story.
History teaches us that the female is capable of reaching higher in point of virtue than the male, but that once she gives way to vice, she sinks far lower than our sex. My hypothesis, then, is that the female prisoner Manning premeditated, planned, and concocted the murder, and that she made her husband her dupe and instrument for that purpose.
But the jury return a swift and decisive verdict. For both husband and wife, it's going to be guilty. Maria has shown no emotion this far, but now, as the verdict is delivered, she's furious.
My lord, I have been treated most cruelly in this country. I am a foreigner, and I have been denied justice. I have not been treated like a Christian, but like a wild beast of the forest. If I wish to take anybody's life, why should I not take that of my husband, who is the greatest enemy to me in the world? Why should I kill Mr. O'Connor? He was my best friend. Base, shameful England.
It's too late for all this sort of thing. Maria and Frederick are sentenced to death. The date of the execution is set for the 13th of November 1849, and the place will be the rooftop at the former Horsemonger Lane jail. So it will be a huge public spectacle for Londoners. Ros Crone and I went along to see why. Ros, we're here in a South London park. We've got basketball courts, plane trees. It's all pretty peaceful. But that wasn't the case in 1849, was it?
No. So if you could imagine in this area, we're talking about 30,000, maybe even 50,000 spectators turning up, having fun, bit of a festival atmosphere going on, waiting for the criminals to be brought out in the morning, first thing, to be executed on the roof of the prison.
That's like a kind of stage set then. They're lifted up above all of these people. Everyone can see them dying?
Yeah, that's right. There's a real theatrical kind of element to execution at this time. Newgate Jail's the same, where they have a kind of protruding stage and people gathering around it to see. It's the idea of the performance of justice. and kind of catharsis, giving the public a sense that justice has been done.
There was merchandising, wasn't there, Ros?
Yeah, I talked about the festival atmosphere. And if you can imagine, amongst the crowd here were what we call patterers or broadside sellers. And I've got a picture of some of their wares to show you here.
These are sort of proto-newspapers they were selling.
Proto-newspapers, very, very cheap to print and also very decorative. So here you see you get the scene of the execution, an account of the trial. You get the confession of one of the murderers. That's Frederick's confession there. You get a little picture of what's going on in his condemned cell just before the execution.
It's the last interview with his sister.
Yeah.
And the sister's crying. It's very, very moving.
People take it away as a souvenir. It's a memento. Some people would even hang it in their drawing room or their kitchen. It's like posters. And after the execution, the patterers would fold them up in such a way that they can then be sold on as books. Now, we have an estimate that about 2.5 million of these were sold just on the Mannings.
The Mannings?
Yeah, that's just an estimate.
Wow.
I think probably it was many more.
Maria is everywhere. Her waxwork is displayed in Madame Tussauds' Chamber of Horrors. It's there for over 100 years. It's still there right up to the 1970s. Back to the execution. On the morning of her hanging, Maria Manning requests a new pair of silk stockings to wear, and on the scaffold, she retains her dignity to the end. The spectators include the novelist Charles Dickens. He pays 2 guineas to get a seat with a good view. He is appalled by the crowd's raucous behaviour, but he's rather fascinated by Maria herself.
A fine shape, so elaborately corseted and artfully dressed, that it was quite unchanged in its trim appearance as it swung slowly from side to side.
That's really creepy of you, Dickens. He will go on to reimagine Maria in his fiction. In his novel Bleak House, he'll give some of her attributes, spoiler alert, to a murderous lady's maid called Hortense. Back in our studio, here's Ros come to join us, Kate.
Hello.
Hi, Kate. Hi, Lucy.
Now, I am struck, Kate, by just how theatrical all that stuff was at the jail. It's really powerful, isn't it?
It's fantastic. I mean, it's awful, obviously, because 2 people died horribly. But it is also fantastic that she is so poised and she walks wonderfully and he's all feeble and he has to be helped up there. And you could just imagine the crowd being all, noisy, and they're all eating and drinking. They will have, bought snacks. They would have bought lots of things. And it will be a party atmosphere until the moment that they walk up onto the scaffold, and then you could just imagine this massive crowd, thousands of people, falling silent.
The further back in the past these things are, the easier it is to imagine them as dramatic spectacles and sort of theatrical and something a bit filmic about it.
Yeah.
If that was happening today, we would find it incredibly distasteful.
No, absolutely. And that's the thing. But it was different then.
Yeah.
I mean, there used to have been a lot of hangings. And then the laws were changed and you were only left with treason and murder. So actually the crowd had been denied a lot of these public spectacles. And the debate is already, well, it's going to start, isn't it, about whether they should be public or not.
And Ros, that verse we've been hearing throughout this story, tell us a bit about that. That's one of the ballads, right?
Yeah, that's a song, or what we call a copy of verses, and you see these things appear on the broadsides that were sold on execution day. Yeah, they're very crude songs, and they're often just written by one of the hacks who was employed by the printer.
It's amazing. I mean, what's so incredible about it is that already the way that she chose to die and the things she said are being changed by other people into something completely different, the repentance and deserve this, nothing of what actually happened there. So already she's becoming a legendary mythical figure.
That's exactly right. What you've got to remember about these broadsides as well, they are printed before the execution day.
Yeah.
And so all of this is done before the hanging actually takes place. And so the description you get along the side of the hanging day itself, in some respects, it's fiction.
Kate, do you feel that Maria Manning's story has been told so many times now, it's really hard for us to know who she actually really was?
Well, the thing is, it's impossible to know who anyone is if they don't write their own story, because there will always be an agenda. There will always be somebody representing what they think the person was like, or using a character such as Maria Manning to make a moral message, to say that this is what happens when you have confident women who take charge. The thing I liked about this story, and this is going to sound daft, but so many women who kill obviously have killed because something awful's happened to them. They've had no choice, or it's self-defence, or they are victims in some way or another. What is, I think, unusual about Maria Manning, and of course many of your lady killers, is that there is purpose and determination and agency. And I think that's why her story is told so many times. And of course, every time it's retold, she becomes somebody else again.
You've written a lot about remarkable women who've been missed out of conventional histories. Do you think that we should include bad ones as well as goodies?
I really do. History, if it's only half the population, if it's only men, isn't history at all. And we cannot put women into history on the basis of likability. We've got to have the courage to put all the women back, the sinners and the saints, because that's what we do with men. It's got to be everybody.
So, on a practical level, Maria Manning can give us a few pointers on how not to commit a murder. Don't leave your blood-stained clothes at a major London railway station. Don't leave the false teeth in your victim's mouth. But while, of course, we can't condone bashing your lover on the head and burying him under the kitchen floor, it does seem to me that Maria was also punished for having had a lover in the first place, for being sexually voracious, also for looking too good in her black satin dresses, and also for being Swiss. And she has undeniably left a legacy. Partly inspired by her case, Dickens and others argued hard to end what they saw as the shameful practice of public execution. It got abolished in 1868. And he recreated the hunt for Maria in Bleak House, which is actually an early version of a detective story with the police as heroes, like so many others to follow. There's something so compelling about Maria Manning. I have to admit that she's one of my favourite Victorian murderesses. She was a criminal, it's true, but she was also an extraordinary woman.